Greetings, everyone. I'm Mar, and once again, this is my opinion. As you can tell from the title and from the thumbnail, it's time for the beginning of another video review series. I started one of Everybody Loves Raymond, where I'm going to be going through each individual episode, giving my thoughts on it, about how it connects with other episodes continuity-wise, the performances, any issues I might have with the particular episodes. Well, instead of starting a long-running one, aside it, like the channel that I got this idea from does with Deep Space Nine and Star Trek The Next Generation, I decided, why not alongside it for a little bit, do a shorter series. Same type of genre, sitcom, but enough slight differences to where it doesn't feel exactly the same. And that is when I thought, how about this show? There's only 12 episodes, it's a sitcom, it's one I've been meaning to do a video about, well, another video about, in a while, and it gives me an excuse to rewatch the show as well. And that, of course, is Fawlty Towers. This is a VHS I have. I have 3 of the VHSs that were released. There's 3 episodes on each one. Got these at, I believe I got these at Savers, which is like a thrift store. Well, there's a thrift store. It's like a big chain thrift store. I only know of one out here, but the weird thing about this is that one of these, I got the wrong tape in the box. That one says The Builders, Psychiatrist, and Wedding Party, but the tape is the Germans. So I guess the tape is asking me, please do not mention the war. And just on camera, I'm just going to double check that the other 2 are the correct ones. And Basil the Rat, that's the right one there. Kipper and the Corpse. So that means I still got to get one more of these, and then I have the whole set on VHS. Well, obviously one of them's going to have the wrong one of those, but maybe I could always do a reprint thing and then put a little sticker on top of it. Now, since this is going to be the first episode in this series, it's the best place to go into my history with this show. It's not as nostalgic as my history with Everybody Loves Raymond, and doesn't stretch back as far, so it's going to be a little bit less hypothesizing and a little bit more straightforward. I was introduced to this show by John Cleese himself in his stand-up that he did for the Alimony Tour Year 4, or as he says, Feeding the Beast. Because during the course of that comedy special, he goes through his whole life from before his conception, talking about his parents, his family, going into some of his early childhood, his early career after he graduated from college, early stuff before Python, work with Python, all the way through to some more modern stuff, such as Chapman's funeral, which I know that's weird to say that's modern since that's 40 years ago, give or take. But, going to be 40 years ago pretty soon, but more modern compared to everything else. And of course he touches on Fawlty Towers, which when I heard that I'm like, he did another show? I mean, I'd done some research on Python, but I'd probably only seen this in passing, so it just went in my mind and then went off into the void. And so, I'm like, alright, I'm listening about it, and he shows some clips, which, how he talks about the clips and shows them, I will address when we get to that episode, because there was one weird thing I didn't notice about it until I actually watched the episode proper, and the way he presents it makes it seem like something weird about the scenes. But watching this, I'm like, oh, that's interesting. And I do like how he sets up his idea for the show. And that was the genesis of this show came about when they were still doing Monty Python. They were on location filming in 1970. I like to imagine it was when they were on location looking for a spot to film the fish slapping dance. But that's just my inner headcanon there, to use a phrase I don't like using. Well, they were stopping at the Glen Eagle Hotels the Pythons were staying at the Glen Eagle Hotel in Torquay, which at that time was run by Mr. Donald Sinclair and his wife. And as John Cleese puts it, Mr. Sinclair was the most rude man he had ever met. And he was amazed by just how rude this man was, how he behaved with the guests. Like, the story he tells, it sums up Mr. Sinclair, and when you watch the show, you really do see how he is the inspiration for the character of Basil Fawlty. Was he was passing by a table when they were eating, and then he saw Terry Gilliam cutting his steak in the American fashion, where it's like, then once you're done, and he just pauses and he's watching, and he's like, we don't eat that way in this country, without missing a beat. Extremely rude, and to steal a phrase that Deborah Barone will use, intrusive. Makes me wonder how he would get along with Marie. That's just one of many things he did. Like, there's the incident that is mentioned on the show, but they don't say which python the case belonged to. It actually belonged to Eric Idle, so that just makes the story a little funnier. He left his briefcase in the front, and then it was thrown over a wall, and he asked him, why was this thrown over a wall? Oh, we've had some staff problems recently. Which, that is something I can see the character saying. Then Graham Chapman asking for an omelet with 3 eggs. So, when you ask for that, you would assume it's going to be an omelet made with 3 eggs. Nope. He got an omelet with 3 eggs on top of it. Personally, I would find that a win. It's like, that's more protein than I asked for. But, really, combined with everything else, that's just passive-aggressive. Of course, arguing with Michael Palin, which, in general, is something that you're like, what? Why would you argue with Michael Palin? He's so hard to hate. You just can't help but like the guy. But yep, arguing with Michael Palin about pre-booking the Glen Eagles Hotel to watch a television program. And then, of course, getting into an argument with Cleese when Cleese asked him to call for a taxi. And then Mr. Sinclair took his sweet time. Now, after a couple nights, most of the pythons left, but John decided to stay behind, because he was already forming an idea about his show at this point, even if just loosely. As a writer, I can tell you, when you get inspired by something, even if you don't have the full germ of the idea up here, the wheels in your head will start turning. In this regards, I can tell you, from my profession, the type of profession I'm involved in right now, security officer in a casino, would make an interesting premise for a show. You just would have to get the characters right, get the whole process down, and of course, even though it'd be more of a comedy, it would also work with some drama moments. But, it's like inspiration. Well, after he left Python, he decided to work on it with his then-wife, Connie Booth, who also is on the show. And they spent a lot of time writing. They would spend 6 weeks writing each script, which that sounds like a long time on just one episode. And it is. But since John was a writer first and an actor second, you can understand why he decided to do that. And when you actually watch the episodes and see how funny they are, some of it is very British, but if you do like your British humor, it works. But other elements of it, you can understand. Even if you're watching a dub version of it, it's very easy to understand. I mean, the whole thing about him not liking some of the people coming in, you can understand that if you work in customer service. Because the line from Clerks comes in, just because they serve you doesn't mean they like you. That comes to mind with this. But then at the same time, when you watch certain scenes, you're like, okay, Basil, you're really blowing this out of proportion. But then you see his wife Sybil always getting on about stuff. Even, I'm not married, but living with my grandmother at times, I understand that. It feels like that. It's like, one thing at a time. I'm trying to do this. You interrupt me. I asked you, please let me finish this first and all that. It's like, they're like, in the first episode here, you really do get that feeling from Basil. I know I'm jumping a little bit ahead, but they really did nail down that character trait for Basil. Now, I didn't notice it when I was first watching this show myself, but the character of Manuel, the help who hails from Barcelona and speaks a little bit of English, but mostly speaks in Spanish. Apparently, there's a lot of controversy about him, considering that a lot of people consider him a stereotypical character. Which, watching this episode back after reading it, I'm like, I can kind of see it, but I would say he's more a stock character than him being stereotypical. And even Cleese himself said that he did not intend for him to be a spoof of the stereotypical characters in the sense of like, oh, look at the stereotypical character, look how stupid he is, he can't get the job done right, And that's part of the reason why they wrote Manuel to be a good-natured character who you like, and when he is the butt of a joke or in trouble, you were like, oh no. Like, the only time that he's only generally hurt, I think, a couple times in the show. Like, once, of course, when he gets his sleeve caught on fire, which his actor, Andrew Sachs, actually did get stunt pay for. But there's a time he gets hit upside the head, which they meant to stunt that, but I'll address that in that episode. And then, of course, the time he gets punched off screen, which I believe is in the next episode, which I'll talk about that in that episode. It's more a spoof on the cheapness of hotel management. And, of course, given how the character of Basil Fawlty is, it's understandable. Now, before I jump ahead of this, the whole thing about Basil being based on Donald Sinclair, apparently, when, years after the show finished, when Cleese actually did let it slip who he based it off of, they tracked down Mr. Sinclair's wife, because I guess he was gone by this point, and she just got up on her high horse, getting all foghorn leghorn. I can't believe that John Cleese would base this on my husband. My husband was nothing like Basil Fawlty. He made millions of dollars off our unhappiness. Oh, I can't believe him. And then, of course, as John puts it, after that, a lot of the former employees came out and go, no. He was exactly like Basil Fawlty. He was exactly. And, of course, he even nailed the point. They had the Sinclair's own daughter watch a couple episodes of the show, and then when she was done watching them, she's like, that's Dad. Now, to play devil's advocate here, Cleese mainly based Basil on his observations of Mr. Sinclair. There could be a side of him that we don't see, so in that regards, Basil is kind of a caricature, but they well round him in their own way. So while he's kind of like, I'd say he's probably like 50 to 70% what John saw, and the rest is John creating the character inspired by Mr. Sinclair. But there's enough there to where you're really like, yep, that's the same, that's him. And of course, to even add to this further, in a later movie, Cleese played a hotel owner named Donald Sinclair that was in Rat Race. So everything comes full circle. Getting into the meat of this video, where we're going to be talking about the first episode, A Touch of Class. And like I mentioned from time to time on Everybody Loves Raymond, a lot of these episode titles do fit them. But from what I've read, I guess a lot of them were added years later when they were shown in syndication or on home video, which is kind of like syndication, only you can rewind right away and watch it. You don't have to wait for it to replay again. It's a more personal syndication if you think about it. Well, they had to put episode names, I guess, so you know which episode is. And some of them they did there, but even with that, the names being applied retroactively, they still fit, like this one, and the later one, the Kipper and the Corpse, Basil the Rat. But A Touch of Class, it just fits it, and it really does go with what Basil wants for the hotel. Because the episode starts with a scene that could have been just an average day in the life of the hotel. Sets up the characters well, you understand Basil, you understand his wife, you see she's a little overbearing, and despite his outgoing and snobbish behavior, Basil does bow to her wishes. There might be some times where he tries to stand up for himself, like when it comes to him talking about the advertisement and how much it cost. He ends up relenting, and she gets her way in the end. We're introduced to Polly, one of the helps, We're introduced to the help. There's Polly, played by Connie Booth, who is an art student in this first season, but she switched professions by season 2, which was filmed a couple years later. That's one thing I like about some of these British shows, is that not every season is the year after. And it's a different model to get used to, but it allows for the writing to be a bit better. And also to come up with more ideas before you sit down and start typing. Of course, there's Manuel, Andrew Sachs, which he's German in real life, which watching how he plays the character so convincingly is like, I would not have assumed that. And of course, the funny little thing we see between Manuel and Basil is that Basil is always trying to get Manuel to do what he wants, even though there's that language barrier thing, which is where most of the humor between them arises. And it's mainly because Basil thinks he can speak Spanish, but even me, someone who most of the Spanish I retain up here is stuff I use for work, or what my grandmother taught me when I was a kid. Me llamo Mario Rios. La biblioteca, stuff like that. Even I can see that most of the crap that Basil is trying to say is him making up stuff that just sounds official. And it's like, really, Basil? Really, you're going to hire someone that speaks Spanish and you don't even understand how to tell them how to do their job? It's like, at least learn some basic things. Like with the first thing, he's trying to tell him that he has the wrong amount of butter on the trays. It's supposed to be 2, and I guess he has 3 or 4 on there. You just learn the word for butter and you go, tres. Or just combine it, speak Spanish, like, tres butter, no, dos butter, or however you do it. Manuel would at least be able to gauge it, be, oh. But no, Basil doesn't do that. It's beneath his notice to think of something about that. You get the Major, played by Bellard Berkeley, who is a recurring background character, who's a major that was in for at least 20 to 30 years, fought in the last couple wars. And it seems now he's going a bit senile. He's still there at times, but you could tell from his conversations with Basil that he is far gone. But due to his service, Basil does respect him and does try to make sure he's comfortable there. He's the one person besides the workers at the hotel who's a constant fixture there. So gets his pension or whatever other source of income he has, pays for his hotel stay. It's a little weird to see someone constantly staying at a hotel rather than as like using it as like an apartment than going, but I'm guessing he probably has some prior little arrangement with the Fawltys to where it works for them, and they're like, as long as he doesn't harm the other guests, he's fine. I can imagine that when he first started staying there, that's what Sybil said, and he's like, and then Basil's like, all right, he's a war hero, we'll do this deal for him, but just for him, Sybil. As the episode plays out, it seems Basil's idea about trying to attract a higher group of clientele is working because a lord and lady are going to be staying there. And Basil's whole thing about wanting to attract a higher class of clients, even though they are making money with who they are, even though Basil's going about it in a snobbish manner, from my work I can understand his whole meaning. I came to my work long after I heard it was like this, but I hear like at least a decade ago, that work, there's a lot more stuff, fights, a lot more drug-related stuff. I'm not going to give any specifics because even I don't know the specifics. But compared to what I've seen, which I'm not going to give any specifics there for obvious reasons, it's night and day, and you're like, I can see. We still get the type of people that Basil would want to run off, but it's a step in the right direction, and it's something Basil would be like, if we can only get rid of the rest of those riffraff. But like Sybil said, we're making money. You're running a business, making money is the important part. And that seems to be one thing that Basil doesn't seem to grasp. He gets the concept in a generalized version of it, but when it comes to being in practice, he never seems to get it down to a science. He wants to attract a higher class of people, which means he has to spend some money, but then that means you're out that money until you can recoup it. And although it happens at the end, you're not going to recoup it, so it's one of the running gags of this entire series that he wants to make Fawlty Towers seem like it's a high-class place to stay at when you're staying in Torquay, but nope. It always blows up in his face. Well, as he's going about doing almost everything at once, to go through the thing of how hectic it is running a hotel, nice little touch there for the pilot episode, we are introduced to Lord Melbury, who seems to be a good character, but as we find out by the end, he's the closest this episode has to an antagonist because he's a fraudster. Which at first we don't realize that. At first he actually comes across as a genuine lord. And it's the performance of the actor I think sells that. Michael Gwynn. The moment you see him, you know that he does have some money, but you're not assuming he's a lord. He's talking nice. He's not getting upset when Basil keeps putting him on hold at the sign-in, trying to do everything at once, because he says, oh, this is a busy man running a hotel. I'll wait for him to finish. And then when Basil finds out he is Lord Melbury, Basil drops everything and starts trying to suck up to Lord Melbury. And Melbury, he doesn't let it slip by how he acts. It's very subtle, and Gwen does a good job of performing this, but he takes advantage of this, especially after Basil accidentally hits him. He gets the best seat in the dinner room, he gets a complimentary alcohol. Later on, he even manages to talk Basil into loaning him £100, which, even accounting for the difference between pounds and dollars, that had me scratching my head like, how much money would that be? So I found a pound to dollar converter. Now, before I get into the specifics of the math, I want to make it clear that I know that when the show was made, the conversion from pounds to dollars would have been different than it is now. But I did it from a modern viewpoint, and then went back to see how much the buying power of this would be now, just so you have some perspective. From a modern standpoint, £100 is the same as $126. Now, when you convert $126, what it was worth at the time this episode was made, to now, it'd be the equivalent of Lord Melbury asking for over $700. Think about that. He just casually asks Basil to borrow $700 so he doesn't have to go to the bank. And Basil, just because he just assumes it's a lord who will spend that amount of money back into the hotel easily within his stay, agrees. He sends Polly off to cash it, which of course leads to her finding out the truth about Melbury from another one of the secondary characters who comes in before Lord Melbury and ties into Basil's hatred of riffraff, as he calls them. And when Polly tries to inform him, like, hey, he's a fraud. That guy is watching him he's with the government. He's trying to find him. Oh, I'm sure he is. I'm sure there's another reason, implying that he's only telling Polly that story to get into her skirt, which ties into one thing he did say to Basil, like, hey, I'll get a double. Maybe I'll be lucky tonight. Just the way that Basil looks at him when he hears that, he's like, oh, I don't think you will be. Of course, shows how prudish Basil could be at times, too, which ties into a later episode, where he's actively trying to stop such degenerate behavior, as you would probably call it. Robin Ellis is Mr. Brown. He sells it pretty well. You see both sides of him. You see him playing the Cockney geezer, like, got any rooms? And then, of course, it turns out he speaks Spanish, which should be the first hint that's not all is right with him, but you could be like, oh, he's a Cockney that knows how to speak Spanish. He probably learned it somewhere. Could have learned it in school. And it's there to show that Basil should not be judging a book by his cover, which, of course, Basil does a lot. But that just adds to his character that you're like, Basil, you shouldn't be judging. And then, of course, when it blows up in his face later, it's like, ha ha ha. And, of course, here, when he does finally find out that Lord Melbury is a fraud, which the way they do it, it still has me chuckling, because he's just droning on as Sybil's opening the locker, open up the safe, excuse me, and then we see this case was full of bricks. He was probably just going to leave them there and go ahead, and didn't leave, and it's like, you could tell that Basil really wants to kill Lord Melbury, or at least use those bricks on him. And the way he turns the table and lets Lord Melbury know he knows it's a fraud, you could tell that his behavior is switched. And it should be the first hint to Lord Melbury that something is not right. I'm actually surprised he didn't realize that the jig was up before the bricks were mentioned. But I guess he was thinking, like, is he drunk? Is he high? And then once he hears bricks, he's like, oh no. And to add to it, the actual Lord and Lady are arriving at that same time. Which just shows, even if he does get that 100 pounds back he loaned Lord Melbury, which, given that he's a fraudster, I doubt it. At least not until after the court case is done. The rest of the money he thought he was going to get from that advertisement, he's probably not going to get it back anytime soon, because I have a feeling that Lord and Lady, after what they saw and what they see Basil doing as they're starting to drive away, they're going to tell all their friends not to come in there. And then after that, we get another one of their guests continuously asking for a drink that Basil never makes him until the end of the episode. It's a semi-complicated one, like some I forget what it is, something with a lemon squash. But just the way that the actor sells it, getting very annoyed, especially since he was asked to move his table the night before, combined with everything, he's probably thinking, I'm never coming back to this hotel again. This owner is too crazy. Which, since this is the first episode, you really got to nail that point home. That even Basil is trying to get things right. His actions, even from his standpoint, he thinks they're right. From the standpoint of the guests, he's being extremely rude. And I believe that is what Cleese was going for, to try to nail down Basil's character effectively. I mean, he's based on Donald C. Clare, who I mentioned before. So obviously they got to get all that character trait down, and I guess you could say that that guest who keeps asking for his drink is a personification of how the Pythons must have been feeling when they were staying with Mr. Sinclair. And just seeing Basil trying to get a couple shots in at Melbury as he's taken in, and the cops are like, no, Mr. Fawlty, no. It just adds to the whole situation. And it just shows, no matter what, Basil cannot catch a break. That would be a way to sum up Basil's entire character in this show. When it comes to him trying to do stuff, Basil cannot catch a break. All in all, A Touch of Class is a good first episode. Sets up the characters well, shows the setting, you get some good character interactions. Like I said, shows that Basil cannot catch a break. And it shows that if you're going to run a business, the last thing you want to be is extremely rude without cause. Because it will come back to bite you in the ass. Speaking of backsides getting bitten, that ties into the next episode of Fawlty Towers, which is set up in dialogue that Basil has over the phone in this one, and that is that Basil is very cheap when it comes to him wanting to fix stuff internally in the hotel. He's happy to spend £50, or is it £40? Either way, that amount of money on advertisement to get people to come into the hotel, but when it comes to adding stuff to the hotel, he's cheap as can be. I mean, Look at who he hires. He hires Manuel. I mean, nice character, but he's a cheapskate. And it's going to come back to bite him in the butt in the next episode when he hires builders for a wall, and they kind of revolt at one point. That concludes my review of A Touch of Class. If you want to support the channel, be sure to like, share, and subscribe to the video. If you have any requests or want to help the channel grow in other ways, the PayPal link is down below. And until next time, guys.